In 2014, the British government published a 344-page report that cost £5 million to produce. The conclusion? An airport that never existed was technically viable but would not be built. 6 years of debate, millions spent on studies, and the result was a document filed away. That was not an exception, it was a pattern. Since 1970, the United Kingdom has launched at least 4 different plans to solve London's aviation capacity crisis. 4 attempts, 4 failures, and with each failure, Heathrow became fuller, more expensive, and more irreplaceable than before. The question nobody asks is this: what if Britain's real problem was never a lack of courage to expand Heathrow, but an obsession with building something else instead? Heathrow is not just the UK's largest airport, it is the country's largest export port, moving £215 billion in cargo per year, more than all other British airports combined. It is the entry point for 80% of long-haul passengers arriving in the United Kingdom. It is the only British airport capable of operating as a genuine intercontinental hub, where a passenger from Lagos can connect to Toronto without routing through Frankfurt. In 1990, Heathrow was the world's busiest international airport, 480,000 movements per year, 2 runways, 0 spare capacity. And that is where the problem begins. Heathrow hit its ceiling at precisely the moment the world began growing faster than ever before. The expansion of Asian trade, the rise of African economies, the explosion of routes to Latin America, all of it happened after 1990, and Heathrow did not have a single slot to offer. The biggest hub in Europe was paralyzed by its own greatness. Today, we are going to analyze why the United Kingdom spent 40 years trying to build a replacement for Heathrow, and why it failed every single time. We will look at the logic behind each alternative plan and why none of them solved the real problem, one that keeps compounding to this day. And we will examine the current bet, a 3rd runway that has already been approved, canceled, and reapproved, and that in 2026 still does not exist. The first Plan B was Gatwick. In the 1970s and 1980s, the British government invested heavily in expanding the airport south of London. New terminals, more gates, and a campaign to attract long-haul routes. The logic seems sound. Spread the demand, relieve Heathrow, build a second hub. What the planners did not foresee: hubs are not built by decree. Hubs are built by airline decisions, and not a single major carrier voluntarily transferred its connecting operations to Gatwick. Without connections, there is no hub. Gatwick became an efficient point-to-point airport, dominated by domestic and leisure flights. Today, it serves 228 destinations, but with no connecting network that can compete with Frankfurt or Amsterdam. The second plan was Stansted. Margaret Thatcher backed a new terminal designed by Norman Foster, opened in 1991 to critical acclaim, with capacity for 15 million passengers. The result was identical to Gatwick, but faster. Stansted was captured by low-cost carriers, primarily Ryanair, which today operates more than 40% of the airport's flights. Ryanair does not connect passengers. Ryanair moves passengers from A to B. The hub mechanism, the very reason Heathrow is worth what it is worth, never took root at Stansted. The third plan was the most ambitious and the most expensive of all. Between 2008 and 2014, Boris Johnson, then Mayor of London, publicly championed the construction of an artificial airport in the Thames estuary, dubbed by the press as Boris Island. Cost estimated by the Airports Commission itself, between $70 and $90 billion in public money, nearly double what the project's proponents claimed. Ruled out definitively in September 2014. Construction timeline? Decades. Logistical viability? Contingent on closing Heathrow entirely and transferring all operations to a site with no existing transport infrastructure. 6 years of political debate consumed. $5 million in studies produced. Result? 0 meters of runway built. The pattern became impossible to ignore in March 2025, when an electrical substation 2 kilometers from Heathrow caught fire. The airport did not burn. It did not need to. The power failure shut Heathrow down completely for the first time in its 77-year history. 1,300 flights canceled, 200,000 passengers stranded. Economic damage estimated in the hundreds of millions of pounds in a single day. Frankfurt absorbed part of the overflow. Amsterdam absorbed part of the overflow. Heathrow had nothing to redistribute because it operates at 99% capacity under normal conditions. When the system failed, there was no slack. There was no contingency plan built on spare capacity. The UK's most important airport stopped dead, like a factory with no backup generator. But the March 2025 crisis was not the cause of the problem. It was the most expensive demonstration yet of a fragility that had existed for decades, and that each failed Plan B had made a little worse. The United Kingdom's answer in 2026 is the same as in 2003, in 2009, in 2016, and in 2022. A third runway at Heathrow. The numbers have been known for decades. A third runway would add 260,000 movements per year, a 54% increase in capacity. It would unlock 150 new routes. It would generate $61 billion in economic benefit over 60 years, according to independent estimates. Construction cost? $14 billion. The detail that almost nobody mentions, $14 billion is exactly the figure that Oxford Economics estimates the United Kingdom loses every year in GDP foregone due to Heathrow's capacity constraints. The country has already lost the equivalent of the total construction cost between 2010 and 2025 alone, without building anything. The unusual twist in the current version of the project is the attempt to embed climate offsets directly into the expansion plan, a response to the 2020 judicial veto, when the Court of Appeal blocked the runway for violating Britain's commitments under the Paris Agreement. In 2022, the Supreme Court overturned that ruling, but conditioned any progress on an updated climate impact assessment. Heathrow now has to prove it can grow within Britain's emissions targets, something no airport in the world has ever been required to demonstrate before breaking ground on a new runway. The vulnerability of this bet is the same as always. The most optimistic opening date cited by Heathrow Airport Holdings itself is 2035, 9 years away. In British infrastructure, that is a deadline, not a guarantee. While the United Kingdom debated Boris Island, studied Gatwick, and approved and cancelled its third runway, Amsterdam was executing. Schiphol grew from 270,000 movements in 1990 to nearly 500,000 in 2019. Today, it serves 330 destinations, 136 more than Heathrow. That gap is not an abstract number. It represents direct routes to cities in West Africa, Central Asia, and South America that depart from Amsterdam every single day and do not exist from London. Schiphol's structural advantage is not its size. It is its network. Every new route attracts more connections. More connections attract more airlines. More airlines make the hub more valuable for the next route. It's a self-reinforcing cycle, one that the United Kingdom allowed a Dutch airport to build in the space that should have belonged to Heathrow. Money cannot fix this. A third runway in 2035 does not recover 35 years of established routes, loyal travelers, and airline alliances consolidated at Schiphol. The United Kingdom can build the runway. It cannot buy back the lost time. The result? $14 billion lost per year, a Dutch rival with 136 more routes, and a third runway that the country has been building on paper since the Berlin Wall was still standing. The race is not over, but the United Kingdom is competing with a 35-year head start working against it. If you want to understand the real money behind global aviation, subscribe to the channel for more analysis. See you next time.